This video contains spoilers for all media relating to Batman and Spider-Man. Viewer discretion is advised. When you think of superheroes, there are two names, two icons, that are likely at the forefront of your mind: DC Comics and Marvel Comics. Both companies are famous for their expansive collections and lines of superhero characters. Both have tons of fans and tons of beloved properties, but, of course, there's always the one character. The character that is the most popular, most legendary, and stands tall above all the other characters and properties of their respective company. For DC, it's the Caped Crusader, the Dark Knight, Batman. And for Marvel, it's their friendly neighborhood web-slinger, Spider-Man. Batman and Spider-Man are big, widespread names in entertainment. And while the two are very different in terms of what they are, what they represent, what company makes them, etc., they're also very similar in terms of where they are today. Both characters are exceedingly popular, mainstream pop culture icons that have been on multi-decade journeys to their current position of prominence. Both started out as comic book characters and have since basically touched every entertainment medium, from books to animation to movies and, of course, video games. Both have had successful iterations in every medium too, with each unique successful take only making them even more popular and beloved. And yet, with each rise comes an inevitable fall. These days, in 2024, things are actually a bit dicey for both characters. It's easy to see that both characters have already kind of hit their peaks in multiple mediums, and now there's a visible decline in terms of the quality of the products and pieces of media that feature these characters. At the apex of everything is, of course, the comic books. Both Spider-Man and Batman have ongoing comic books that just aren't hitting with longtime fans, mostly due to the creative choices by the teams involved in making said comics. Batman had a really good run in the comics by writer Scott Snyder a few years ago, and everything else has been a bit hit or miss. A failed wedding with Catwoman, the death of Alfred, a slew of new Robins, and the same song and dance with the Joker again and again and again. Spider-Man's fared even worse, with the dreaded One More Day storyline cratering interest of longtime fans by removing decades of development and character progression for almost the entire cast of Spider-Man's core cast of characters. And it's not just the source of it all, the comic books either. Batman and Spider-Man have both had really solid, successful iterations and adaptations in animated TV series, movies, and video games. But in each case, the best days for the characters seem like they're kind of in the rearview mirror at this point. In the realm of movies, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy kind of ended on a weak note with its third film, while the newer iteration that features Robert Pattinson as Batman has seen 2 years without any notable news of a follow-up. And Spider-Man? Well, the original Sam Raimi trilogy featuring Tobey Maguire had an even worse stumble with its third movie. The second iteration, with Andrew Garfield, didn't even make it past its second outing before a reboot had to happen. And then, the new Tom Holland movies feel like they make Spider-Man into Iron Man Jr. rather than his own character. Then there's the cartoons, or animated TV series. With Batman, it's pretty clear that the definitive take on the character is actually from the animated series that came out in the late 1990s, which wrapped up in Batman Beyond and then later in Justice League Unlimited. There have been attempts to revive Batman with various animated adaptations, but almost every fan of the character will agree that nothing has ever come close to the 90s animated series. Spider-Man, on the other hand, is a bit of a mixed bag, with many fans like myself loving the original 1998 series the best, but everyone kind of has their favorite. Spectacular Spider-Man is another huge fan favorite, and a younger take on the character. But beyond that, all the newer incarnations of Spider-Man in the animated realm have been pretty hit or miss. The one exception, of course, are the Spider-Verse movies, but more on those later. Finally, there's the video games. Batman hasn't had a solid game since Rocksteady's Arkham trilogy wrapped up all the way back in 2016. While Spider-Man has had a more recent string of solid games with 2 games from Sony-owned studio Insomniac, but the second game was more of a mixed bag than the universally successful first entry. Ultimately, looking at both characters, where they are, where they came from, and the issues that they're running into, it's actually shockingly simple what the core issue is with both characters. It's actually a problem that both characters have had for a while, and it's a problem that's already had an implemented solution that's since been backpedaled on. If you're familiar with comic books and long-running characters, then you know that comic book characters, the very popular ones at least, have long had an issue with change and growth. Both Batman and Spider-Man have this issue, for sure. But what's unique is the severity of that feeling of stasis that both characters have had. That's the bigger issue. How neither character is allowed to grow, change, or evolve. But it's not the lack of change that's the core issue with both. That's an issue that's inherent in all big-name comic book characters. No. What I think the core issue is with both Batman and Spider-Man is in their alter egos, Bruce Wayne and Peter Parker. Simply put, Batman is Bruce Wayne, and Spider-Man is Peter Parker, as far as those currently writing stories and creating media around those characters are concerned. And that is the inherent, severe problem that faces both characters. By their very nature, Batman and Spider-Man are popular and unique in that they're characters that are very human and relatable, in their own distinct ways, of course. Batman is rich, sure, and he's got a wealth of knowledge and gadgets, but what he represents is the pinnacle of what a human being is capable of, given the right resources, intelligence, and situation, of course. He doesn't have superpowers, he's not invulnerable, and he more or less plays by the same set of rules as regular people, even if he's got a better stacked deck than most in terms of opportunities and resources. Spider-Man is the flip side of the coin. He's got powers, but resources and riches-wise, he's a bit more like a regular guy. He has to juggle relationships, his life as a superhero, his finances, basically everything that a normal adult person has to do these days to survive in the modern day, Spider-Man deals with. Both characters, I'd argue, because of how human they are, how flawed they are, how much they struggle in a world and situation that's beyond them, and how they continue to do their best in spite of all of that, is why they're so beloved and draw such huge audiences. Yet, I think the core issue also stems from the very fact that these characters are human. Humans inherently have short lifespans and have stages to their lives, from being a kid, to a teen, to an adult, to a middle-aged and eventually old man or woman, followed by the inevitable end. A human being, no matter how important, how monumental, dies and passes on. That's part of the human experience, and it's something that you just can't ignore when it comes to crafting relatable, lifelike characters. Yet, Batman and Spider-Man have been the same two people for generations. Batman hit his 85th year anniversary this year, with Spider-Man set to follow later this year with his own 61st anniversary. Both characters are old, have had several iterations and retcons, and yet both characters still feature a young billionaire playboy and a down-on-his-luck youth in his 20s as the core people behind the masks of their respective superheroes. And it's just not working anymore. Look, I'm not one of those people that's going to argue that Batman and Spider-Man should end as characters or properties. That's a reality that I think very few people want, nor will the people profiting from these characters even really allow. I honestly think it's fine to keep these characters going for a few more decades. There's a lot of money and narrative depth to be mined from these characters still, and there's a lot of unexplored ideas and concepts that need exploration. But keeping Batman and Spider-Man as the same people just isn't a thing that I think can continue to work, or feel interesting for that matter. Bruce Wayne and Peter Parker have been done to death. We've seen numerous versions of these characters. We've seen every possible variation that we possibly could, without really the entire character itself being changed to become something new. And yet, I'd argue that someone new is exactly what both characters need. Bruce Wayne's story needs a conclusion, as does Peter Parker's. Both characters, in order for them to remain human and relatable, have to grow old, form their final connections, settle down, and then eventually pass the torch to someone else. Living forever, as your friends, allies, and loved ones age and die, is something that a character like, say, Superman can experience. And it's an interesting idea for sure, but not one that really fits in with the core appeal of more mortal characters like Spider-Man or Batman. What's interesting is that both Spider-Man and Batman have had multiple stories that examine some kind of ending for their current alter egos and provide replacements for them as well. Batman as Bruce Wayne has had his back broken, and then he's been replaced by Jean-Paul Valley, a Batman who was darker, didn't mind killing, and was just a lot more brutal and dark. Bruce has also temporarily died and been replaced by his first sidekick, Dick Grayson. And Dick has gone on to adopt a very different approach to being Batman, complete with his own Robin and Damian Wayne, the son of Batman. Then, in the farther future, Damian himself dons the cowl in a much darker, more depressing, and apocalyptic Gotham City. Bruce has even grown old and had a new kid adopt the mantle of Batman in Terry McGinnis in the Batman Beyond animated TV series. And this version is a version where Bruce ends up bitter, tired, and alone, and has to form a father-like son relationship with the new Batman, guiding him through the trials and tribulations of being the Caped Crusader as a mentor of sorts. And each of these stories, in their different mediums, though either temporary or just being a simple spin-off to the main idea of Batman, have worked. And Spider-Man's pretty similar, with multiple different things echoing some kind of end for Peter Parker as well. There's the Spider-Man Reign comics, of course, that give him a dark, depressing, lonely ending, much like Batman's The Dark Knight Returns comic. Then there's the timeline where he ends up having a daughter with Mary Jane, his wife, who assumes the mantle of Spider-Woman. Then there's the alternate Ultimate Universe, where Peter actually dies and is replaced by Miles Morales. And speaking of Miles Morales, Miles as a character worked so well that even after that Ultimate Universe and that comic book line ended, Marvel ended up moving him to the main 616 comic continuity to reside beside Peter Parker as the other Spider-Man. And then, of course, there's both the Spider-Verse movies and the Insomniac-developed Spider-Man games, which kind of point to Peter passing the torch to Miles and features a Peter Parker that grows past his young adult status into a proper functioning member of society. And let's not forget the currently ongoing new version of the Ultimate Universe, confusingly, which has nothing to do with the old one. But that has a Peter Parker that's older, has been married to Mary Jane for a few years, and has 2 kids. Whether it's Spider-Verse, where Peter Parker dies and leaves Miles to kind of fill his big shoes, or whether it's the video games and the comics, where Peter retires and decides to focus on his life outside of Spider-Man, both are reasonable ideas to conclude the story of Peter Parker as Spider-Man. And yet, despite the relative success of all these different stories and pieces of media, things always shift back to a particular status quo. After these ideas are lightly explored, we go back to the same old. Batman is still Bruce Wayne, and Spider-Man is still Peter Parker. But honestly, it really doesn't need to be this way. The concept has already been proven multiple times. Someone else can be Batman. Someone else can be Spider-Man. And these new versions need to adapt and adjust to the current realities of the modern day. Batman was conceived in 1939, and Spider-Man in 1962. And thus, a lot of the concepts and ideas surrounding how these two characters work and function definitely feel a bit dated. With the way technology is these days, the whole idea of a secret identity and being hidden just isn't possible with the way Bruce and Peter hide themselves in their older stories. Their costumes need to evolve, their strategies for anonymity do as well, and even their ideals and ways of going about things may need to change in order to fit more in the modern day. Do Spider-Man and Batman even need to have alter egos? Can they be mantles or positions that are either shared or passed from generation to generation, from person to person? What happens if Batman wins the war for Gotham City? What does the end game for Spider-Man actually end up being? These are the last bits of unexplored territory that both properties and the characters that feature them need to explore. Batman and Spider-Man are concepts from the late 1900s. What incarnation or version of these characters actually makes sense in 2024? How does the idea of these two characters evolve to meet the challenges and problems of the modern day? That, I argue, is what the people handling these characters today need to grapple with. In the same way that 2012's Skyfall asked the question of what James Bond even is in the modern day, so too does the question need to be asked for icons like Batman and Spider-Man. Why does Bruce Wayne not use his considerable resources to ultimately make Gotham a better place? With the amount of money he has, he really could make a difference and instill systems that make things better. Tackle poverty, inequality, and promote justice, and things like crime are really mitigated. Raise up the right people into positions of power to run things, and society will improve. In a similar vein, why doesn't Peter Parker actually settle down, have kids, and at the very least, get a stable job? There's only so long that a person can continue to struggle with getting a stable job, a good place to live, and have no partner or close friends before it just ultimately results in self-destruction. Peter needs to eventually clean up his act. He needs to take care of himself, and he needs to get better at the whole balancing the act of being Spider-Man and being Peter Parker. And I have to say, I vehemently disagree with anyone that thinks that Spider-Man or Batman will lose their appeal if the people behind the masks change, or if the ideas of what these characters are evolve. Both characters were products of their time, and while I'd love for there to be entirely new characters being made for the modern day, that can't even begin to happen until we get away from doing the same dance again and again and again. Batman and Spider-Man need to change. They need to evolve, and they need to stop being the people and the entities that they've been for the last 50 plus years. And as always, I'd really like to know what you think about all of this. Do you think Batman and Spider-Man are fine the way they are? Do you think they need to change? Or is there something different that can be done with them that hasn't been done yet? Sound off in the comments below, and I'd love to continue to have this rather interesting discussion.